The bell above the cafe door jingled loudly. It was a normal morning until he walked in. Every spoon froze mid-stare. Every conversation dropped to silence. Even the music from the speakers seemed to quiet down out of fear. Mr. Bradley, the millionaire, had arrived, tall, cold, and full of himself. He walked like he owned the world, and maybe he did. He was the kind of man who never smiled unless it was at someone's failure. And when he entered the cafe, even the bravest waiter took a step back. "Where is my usual seat?" He barked. His voice was loud, harsh, and sharp like a knife. One of the waiters, trembling, rushed to wipe his favorite table, clean even, though it was already spotless. Mr. Bradley sat down, pulling out his gold pen and snapping his fingers. "Coffee, black, no delay," he demanded. He didn't say please, and he never said thank you. If the coffee was too hot, he yelled. If it was too cold, he shouted louder. If it came with sugar, he threw it across the room. People in the cafe hated him, but no one said a word. Why? Because he owned 40% of the cafe. He was the biggest investor, and without his money, the cafe could shut down. The manager told the staff to keep him happy at all costs. So they smiled fake smiles and kept quiet while he insulted them. Every morning, people held their breath when he walked in, hoping to survive his visit without being humiliated. That morning, a new waitress was starting her first day. Her name was Amara, a young black woman. Tall, quiet, and calm. She wore the cafe uniform with pride and had a gentle look in her eyes. But there was something else in her, a strength nobody saw yet. "Be careful around Mr. Bradley," the assistant whispered as she handed her the tray. "Who's that?" Amara asked casually. The assistant's eyes widened. "You'll know when you see him," she said with a nervous laugh. And Amara did see him. She noticed how every table avoided eye contact with him, how even the manager's hands shook while talking to him. It was strange and wrong. Why did everyone fear just one man? Then something happened. An old man in a brown coat sneezed from the table next to Mr. Bradley. Just a sneeze, nothing loud, nothing bad. But Mr. Bradley slammed his palm on the table. "Disgusting," he spat. "Do that again and I'll have this cafe closed." The old man apologized softly, but Mr. Bradley wasn't done. "You come to public places with your germs. You should be locked away." His voice echoed through the cafe. The old man looked down in shame, holding back tears, and no one said a word until Amara stepped forward. She wasn't supposed to speak. She was just supposed to carry coffee and smile, but something inside her burned. She had seen this kind of cruelty before, and she was tired of staying silent. She walked slowly toward the table, her tray in hand, her fingers trembling slightly, not with fear, but with control. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice calm but firm. Mr. Bradley turned to her, confused. "Yes," he snapped. "Who even are you?" Amara placed the coffee on his table. Gently. "I'm the new waitress," she said. "But I'm also someone who believes every customer deserves respect." Or poor. Gasps were heard around the cafe. The manager's jaw dropped. The other waiters froze in place. Mr. Bradley leaned back in his chair and laughed. A cold, cruel laugh. "Respect? Don't talk to me about respect. I pay for this place to exist. Who do you think you are?" Amara looked at him straight in the eyes, and then, in the calmest tone, she said, "Maybe the problem isn't everyone else. Maybe the problem is you." Silence. Pure silence. Even the coffee machine stopped hissing, as if listening. The old man looked up, his eyes full of surprise. Mr. Bradley's eyes narrowed. He had never been spoken to like that, especially not by a waitress. His lips curled in anger. But Amara didn't back away. She stood her ground, not with shouting or fear, but with dignity. Everyone watched, waiting for Mr. Bradley to explode. But he didn't. He just stood up, gave her a long, hateful stare, and walked out without touching his coffee as the door closed behind him. A wave of quiet shock filled the cafe. No one clapped, no one cheered. They were too stunned. But one thing was clear. Something had changed, and it all started with the one woman who dared to speak the moment Mr. Bradley left the cafe. A strange silence lingered in the air. No one moved, no one spoke. It felt like everyone was waiting to wake up from a dream. Amara stood still near the table, her hands slightly shaking, not from fear, but from everything she had held inside. The manager rushed toward her, panic all over his face. "What did you just do?" He whispered sharply, grabbing her arm. "Do you even know who that was? He could shut this place down." Amara pulled her arm back gently and said, "I just told the truth." The assistant manager, Kevin, stepped forward, his voice low. "He owns 40% of this cafe," he said. "If he pulls out, we'll all lose our jobs." "I didn't insult him," Amara replied calmly. "I only asked him to treat others like human beings." The old man who had been humiliated earlier slowly stood up. He walked to Amara and placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. "Thank you, child," he said with a weak smile. No one has ever stood up to him like that. That simple gesture made everyone stop. The staff looked at each other. Maybe, just maybe, Amara had done something brave. But the fear of Mr. Bradley's power still hung heavy in the room. Later that afternoon, the cafe was quieter than usual. People came and went, whispering about the waitress who spoke to the monster. Some said she was foolish, others said she was fearless. But Amara? She simply worked, pouring coffee, cleaning tables, and smiling softly at the regulars. But trouble was already brewing. At 6 p.m. a sleek black car pulled up outside the cafe. Out stepped a tall woman in a gray suit and dark glasses. She entered like a shadow and approached the counter with sharp heels tapping the floor. "I'm here for Amara," she said, without emotion. Everyone stared. The woman introduced herself as Mr. Bradley's legal assistant. Amara stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes?" The woman pulled out an envelope and handed it to her. "This is a private settlement offer from Mr. Bradley," she said, her voice cold. "He believes you may have damaged his public image." Amara opened the envelope and found a non-disclosure contract, along with a check for $20,000. All she had to do was sign the papers and promise never to speak of the incident again. Never to talk about what Mr. Bradley said. Never to mention how he had treated the old man. Never to speak up, ever again. The cafe manager pulled her aside and whispered, "Amara, maybe you should take it, just for your safety." Others nodded slowly. $20,000 could change her life. Amara looked down at the paper. Her mind began to drift back to her childhood, back to a dusty living room where her mother cried quietly, where her father lost his business because of a rich man's greed, where her brother had dropped out of school to help feed the family. That man was also Mr. Bradley. Years ago, he had crushed her father's small cafe. Just like this one, with unfair business deals and cruel lies, he had broken their dreams. And now, here he was, again trying to buy her silence. Amara smiled softly and looked up at the woman. "Tell Mr. Bradley I'm not for sale." The woman's expression didn't change, but she slowly took the envelope back. "You've made a mistake," she said, then walked out the door. The entire cafe was frozen. Again, but this time it wasn't fear they were feeling. It was something else. Respect, admiration. Amara didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired, but somehow lighter. She had stood up once again, and this time she had refused a rich man's money. By the end of the day, whispers turned into conversations. Customers started asking, "Is she the one who stood up to the millionaire?" And many nodded with pride. Outside, a reporter waited with a camera, hoping to speak to the waitress who had no fear. Amara walked past him politely and said, "I'm not looking for fame, just fairness." That night, the story went viral. On local social media, a single photo of Amara standing calmly in front of Mr. Bradley's empty chair was shared thousands of times. The caption said, "She served coffee, not silence." The next morning, the cafe was busier than ever. People came not just for coffee, but to see the woman who spoke truth to power, and far away, in a glass office on the 40th floor. Mr. Bradley watched the video of Amara over and over again. His face dark, his jaw clenched. He was not done with her yet. He had money, he had lawyers, and he had control at least. That's what he thought, but what he didn't know was, this wasn't just about a cup of coffee anymore. This was about a woman who had finally found her voice, and she wasn't going to stay silent ever again. The cafe door closed behind the lawyer. Amara stood still. The sound of her own heartbeat echoing louder than the customer's quiet chatter. She smiled politely at a table, refilled a coffee cup, and pretended everything was normal. But inside, something had shifted. That envelope, that contract, had opened a door in her heart she'd tried to keep shut for years. She walked into the back room, pulled off her apron, and sat on a small bench. Her hands shook as she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded photo. The edges were worn, the image faded, but the memory was sharp like glass. In the picture stood a small family, smiling in front of a tiny red cafe. Her father had one arm around her and the other around her younger brother. Her mother stood beside them, flowers still on her apron, her eyes full of hope. That cafe had been their dream, bean and soul. A little family-run coffee shop in a quiet part of the city. People came for the homemade pies and stayed for the kindness. But all of it vanished in 1 year when a new coffee chain opened next door, owned by none other than Mr. Bradley. He'd promised friendly business, then cut their suppliers, lowered his prices to kill competition when her father tried to talk to him. Bradley laughed when her mother got sick from the stress. He said, "Not my problem." And when they finally closed their shop, Bradley bought the building and turned it into a storage unit. Amara was only 17 at the time. She remembered her little brother crying when their mother collapsed in the kitchen. She remembered her father going silent, broken from the inside out. She remembered how one man's greed crushed their dreams, and now that same man had walked into her life again. Different cafe, but same face, same cruelty. Amara had once promised herself that if she ever met him again, she wouldn't run. A soft knock pulled her out of the memory. It was Kevin, the assistant manager, holding 2 cups of tea. "I figured you could use a minute," he said gently, handing her a cup. Amara gave him a thankful smile. He sat beside her in silence for a few moments before finally speaking. "Why didn't you take the money?" he asked quietly. 20,000 isn't small. Amara looked at the photo in her hand, then said, "Because I've lost more than that." She handed him the photo. Kevin studied it carefully. "That's your family?" She nodded. "My parents ran a cafe just like this one," she explained, "until Mr. Bradley destroyed it." Kevin's eyes widened. "You mean, that's how you know him?" "Yes," Amara said. "He didn't just hurt people today. He's been doing it for years. I didn't speak up to be brave," she continued, her voice softer now. "I spoke up because I've seen what happens when no one does." Kevin nodded slowly, understanding now why she had risked everything. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. "You know," he added, "the old man you defended. He comes in every week." But no one ever talked to him much. Amara smiled. Well, he deserved to be respected at that moment. A staff member entered the back room. Wide-eyed, "You both need to see this," she said, holding up her phone. They followed her out into the main cafe. On the screen was a news headline: "Millionaire bullies old man in caf, but one brave waitress refuses to be silent." Video hits 1 million views overnight. Customers inside the cafe clapped as Amara stepped forward. some taking pictures, others simply nodding in respect. But Amara didn't feel like a star. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but strangely, stronger than ever. The next morning, the cafe opened its doors as usual. But something was different, something everyone could feel. The usual sleepy calm had been replaced with a strange tension. Customers were already lined up outside before the sun had even fully risen. Some came for their coffee, but most came for her. They wanted to see the woman who had stood up to a millionaire. They whispered, pointed, smiled. And some even clapped quietly when they saw Amara. But not everyone was happy. Inside, behind the counter, the cafe staff was divided. Some admired Amara and treated her with new respect. Others avoided her, whispering that she had brought to much trouble. The manager walked in late, his shirt half untucked and his eyes tired. He looked around and sighed. "All right, everyone, let's not make a scene today," he said nervously. He didn't mention Bradley, but everyone knew what. He was thinking the cafe was now under a spotlight. And that spotlight was hot. At noon, things got worse. A man in a black suit entered the cafe, holding a clipboard. He went straight to the manager and whispered something. The manager's face turned pale. Then he called Amara into the back room. When she entered, the man with the clipboard didn't smile. "I'm here to inspect workplace behavior," he said coldly. "There's been a complaint filed about you." Amara's brows lifted. "A complaint?" "Yes," the man replied, flipping through his papers. "Verbal misconduct, public disturbance, creating a hostile environment." The manager cleared his throat awkwardly. "I tried to stop it," he muttered. Not meeting her eyes, "I told you not to provoke Mr. Bradley." Amara's heart dropped. So this was his next move, using power and silence, hiding behind paper and rules. Not shouting this time, but destroying her from the shadows. "I only stood up for a customer who was insulted," Amara said clearly. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't touch anyone, and I didn't threaten anyone." The man didn't care. He simply handed her a form. "You are on temporary suspension, pending investigation," outside the door. Some of the cafe workers were listening. Some smirked, whispering, "I told you she'd bring drama." Others looked upset but said nothing. Amara stepped out of the back room holding the paper. Her coworker Sarah, a young mother who had always been friendly, looked at her with worry. "They're suspending you?" she whispered. Amara nodded. "Yes, that's not fair," Sarah said. "You did the right thing." But then James, one of the older baristas, muttered, "She may have done the right thing, but now we're all in danger of losing our jobs. Why couldn't she just keep quiet like the rest of us?" The cafe was now split. Half saw her as a hero. The other half saw her as a threat. Amara left quietly, not wanting to argue. She walked past the crowd outside, people still waiting to thank her, ask for pictures, or shake her hand. But inside, she felt alone. That night, her phone buzzed with messages from strangers. Some were kind, thanking her for being brave, but others were hateful, calling her a liar, a troublemaker, a nobody who wanted attention. Amara sat on her couch, scrolling through the flood of voices, her heart heavy, her eyes tired. She had spoken up because it was right, but now it was hard to tell if it was worth it. Just then, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find the old man from the cafe. He stood with a small bag of cookies and a quiet smile. "I heard what happened," he said, "and I thought you could use a friend." Amara let him in, and they sat at her small kitchen table. He told her his name was Judge Lionel Gray, a retired judge with decades of experience. And then he said something that made her sit up straight. "I've known Mr. Bradley for years," he said, "and I've seen what he's done to others, just like you." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small black folder. "This," he said, "contains documents from a case that was never finished. Proof of illegal business deals, all connected to Bradley." Amara stared at the folder, her hands shaking slightly. "Why are you giving this to me?" She asked, because, he said, "You're not just brave, you're honest, and that's rare these days. You didn't ask for attention, you asked for decency." He continued, "And now, someone needs to finish what others were." Too scared to start, Amara slowly closed the folder. Her heart now beating with something new. Purpose. Mr. Bradley had money, lawyers, and power. But now, Amara had the truth, and even if she stood alone, she wasn't afraid anymore. Outside, a line had started forming. People wanting to support the cafe. Some brought flowers, some offered hugs, and some just came to say, "Thank you." But far away, in a private penthouse, Mr. Bradley smashed his glass of wine against the wall. His name was trending for all the wrong reasons. His lawyers were calling nonstop. His assistant tried to calm him, but he roared, "That girl is trying to ruin me." He picked up his phone and made a single call. "I want her past checked, her records, her family, everything. If she wants a war, she'll get one." But Amara wasn't planning a war. She just wanted justice. She didn't know what Bradley was planning, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't that 17-year-old girl anymore. She was stronger now, and she had a voice, and this time she would not be silenced. The folder felt heavier than it looked, not because of the paper inside, but because of what it meant. Amara sat on her bed that night, the room dim and silent. Her fingers slowly opened the black file Judge Lionel Gray had given her. The pages were old, yellowed slightly at the edges, but every word was clear. Inside were documents, bank records, emails, and photographs. One image stood out. It showed a younger Mr. Bradley shaking hands with a city inspector. Below it was a signature confirming false land permits, and another page detailed how Bradley's company had evicted multiple families. All without proper notice, all under fake business names. Amara read line after line, her stomach tightening with each word. This wasn't just about her family anymore. This was about dozens of families, small cafes, bookstores, and old neighborhood shops destroyed by one man's greed. She reached the last page, a letter. Never sent, written by Lionel Gray himself. "I tried to bring this to court, but they shut me down. Threats came, evidence vanished, and I was told to retire quietly. I kept this file, hoping someone braver would finish what I couldn't." Tears filled Amara's eyes. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't rich. But she had a voice, and now she had proof. The next morning, Amara went straight to Lionel's home. She rang the bell, and he answered, holding 2 cups of tea like he had been waiting. "I read everything," she said, her voice calm but full of fire. "I want to take him down, but I don't know how." Lionel smiled gently and motioned for her to sit. "That's where we begin," he said. "You don't fight fire with fire. You fight it with light." He explained that while the file was enough to raise questions, it needed media attention to protect it. If Amara filed this quietly, Bradley could make it disappear. But if the public saw it first, they could not unsee it. Later that afternoon, they reached out to an independent journalist named Maya Chen. She ran a blog called Truth Brewed Daily and had once exposed a corrupt police chief. When Maya read the file, her eyes widened. This could destroy him," she whispered. But she asked the most important question. "Are you ready for what comes after this?" Amara took a deep breath. "I've been silent too long," she said. "Now I'm ready." Within hours, the blog posted the story. Exposed documents reveal Mr. Bradley's decade of lies, from fake land deals to forced evictions. One man has quietly destroyed lives until one brave woman said enough. The article was shared thousands of times in the first 2 hours. People who had once been silent victims began commenting. "I lost my bakery to him in 2016. He ruined my uncle's store. Thank you for speaking up. My family tried to sue, but we were too scared. But while the internet buzzed with truth, Bradley was burning with rage in his tall office building. He threw his phone across the room. "Who gave her that file?" he screamed. His assistant stood frozen, unsure what to say. Bradley called his lawyer next. "I want everything on her." "Everything," he growled. "Find something. Anything. I want her to suffer." That night, Amara received a phone. "Callan, unknown number," she answered, expecting it to be a reporter, but a deep voice said, "You think you've won. We can still make you disappear." Then the line went dead. Her hands trembled, but she didn't cry. She recorded the call and sent it to Maya and the police. "This is how they scare people," Amara texted. "But I won't run." The next morning, Amara stood outside the cafe, which had now become a symbol. Crowds gathered not for coffee, but for truth, reporters, former victims. Even city council members came to meet her. Inside, the cafe manager was pacing. The assistant manager, Kevin, approached Amara quietly. "I was scared before," he said, "but now I'm with you." One by one, staff members came forward. Even James, who once said she brought too much drama, said, "You did what we were all too scared to do." And then, something unexpected happened. The mayor's office released a statement. They were officially opening an investigation into Mr. Bradley's business empire. And it all started with one waitress. Amara stood in front of the cafe doors, not with pride, but with peace. For the first time in years, her voice had echoed. Beyond the walls of a small cafe, it had reached boardrooms, courtrooms, and homes, and it all began with a simple word, enough. But Mr. Bradley was not finished yet. He had one more trick, and he planned to use it against her past 2 days after the article went viral. The city felt different. News stations now showed Amara's face. More than any celebrity, people who had never stepped foot in the cafe were now calling it the place where truth was served. But behind all the noise, Amara was scared. Not for herself, but for what Mr. Bradley might do next. She had expected anger, threats, even lawsuits. But what arrived at her doorstep that morning left her speechless. It was a man in a sharp blue suit. Holding a briefcase, he introduced himself as Mr. Bradley's personal negotiator. With a smile too wide to be real, he handed her a letter and said, "Mr. Bradley would like to end this matter peacefully." Amara opened the letter slowly. Inside was a new contract and a check for $1 million. Yes, $1 million, the paper simply said, "Accept this amount. And in return, withdraw all statements, publicly apologize for the misunderstanding, and never speak of Mr. Bradley again." The man gave her a practiced smile and said, "Think of your future, Miss Amara. You can open your own cafe. Pay off your family's debts. Help your brother go to college." Amara stared at the check. Her hands began to shake, not with joy, but with conflict. It was enough money to change her life forever. It was enough to give her father the rest. He never had to fix everything that had been broken. But it came at a price, silence and betrayal. If she took the money, Mr. Bradley would continue doing what he always did. He'd walk away clean again. And everyone who believed in her would be left behind. "I need time," she said quietly. The man nodded. "You have 24 hours." That night, she sat alone at her kitchen table. The check lay on the table like a weapon. She looked around at the peeling wallpaper, the empty fridge, the unpaid electricity bill. Her phone buzzed, and she saw a photo her little brother had sent. He was smiling with their father. Her brother had just finished his shift at the gas station, still working 2 jobs. Amara's heart ached. Was it wrong to want a better life? Was it weakness to accept help, even if it came from the devil? But then she remembered something her mother once said: "If you ever find yourself standing between right and easy, stand for what is right, even if you're standing alone." The next morning, Amara returned to the cafe. she asked the manager. If she could speak to the staff nervously, he agreed, and everyone gathered, including some regular customers who listened quietly from their seats. Amara held the check in her hand. She raised it high so everyone could see. "This is a $1 million check," she said, "enough to change my life." A few people gasped. Kevin looked at her with wide eyes. Sarah covered her mouth, unsure what Amara was about to do, and it came with a contract. Amara continued, "One that would force me to lie, stay silent, and pretend none of this ever happened." She paused, her voice steady now. "I didn't ask for this fight," she said, "but it came to me, and I chose to speak. And today," she added, "I choose again, in front of everyone." Amara tore the check in half, then again, into quarters, and dropped it into the trash. A stunned silence filled the cafe, and then applause, first from Kevin, then Sarah, and then the customers. The room exploded with cheers. Someone shouted, "That's real courage." Another said, "She's our voice." Tears welled in Amara's eyes, but she stood tall. She had made her choice, not for money, not for fame, but for justice. Meanwhile, miles away, Mr. Bradley watched it all unfold on live news. He clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white. "That foolish girl," he hissed. "She thinks this is over. I'll ruin her completely." But before he could pick up his phone, a knock came at his office door. A man in a gray suit stepped in, holding a document. "Sir," he said, "this just came in from the city attorney's office." Bradley snatched the paper and read it. His face turned pale. His name was officially listed in a criminal investigation. The charges: fraud, abuse of power, illegal property seizures. He dropped the paper, his hands trembling. He thought money could silence truth, but this time he was wrong. Back at the cafe, Amara stood near the window, watching the sunset. The cafe was alive again, not just with people, but with hope. She wasn't rich, she wasn't famous, but she had something greater: respect, purpose, and a truth no amount of money could erase. 3 days later, the city woke up to flashing headlines on every news channel. Business tycoon Mr. Bradley arrested for fraud and abuse of power. Waitress's bravery uncovers decade of corruption. The woman who spoke up, Amara, becomes voice of the voiceless. The footage was shocking. Mr. Bradley in handcuffs, wearing his expensive gray suit, his head down as police led him into the courthouse. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and people on the street clapped not for his power, but for his fall. Inside his office, investigators uncovered more files, more names, more broken families. Everything he tried to bury had come back. And at the center of it all stood Amara, the woman he underestimated. Back at the cafe, Amara didn't celebrate. She didn't post pictures, didn't do interviews. Instead, she poured coffee like she always did, smiling gently at each customer. The cafe had changed, though not just in popularity, but in spirit. There was laughter, music, conversations, and most of all, respect. The manager who once scolded Amara for speaking now shook her hand every morning. Kevin, the assistant manager, helped redesign the staff rules to include a new line: "Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, staff and customer alike." Even James, the barista who once doubted her, offered her a small handmade badge that read, "The Voice." Amara smiled and wore it proudly. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that one voice, even when trembling, can still be heard. One evening, just as the cafe was closing, a familiar face entered: Judge Lionel Gray, the old man she had defended that very first day. He walked slowly, but with pride, holding a small package wrapped in brown paper. Amara welcomed him warmly, offered him tea, and sat across from him. He placed the package on the table. "I believe this belongs to you," he said softly. Inside was a small plaque: Made of wood and brass, engraved were the words, "To Amara, for speaking when silence was safer." Tears welled in her eyes as she ran her fingers over the words. "Thank you," she whispered, but Judge Gray shook his head. "No, Amara," he said. "Thank you. You reminded us all," he continued. "That courage isn't loud. It's steady that sometimes the smallest voice can bring the tallest towers crashing down." Later that night, Amara walked home under the stars. The streets were quiet, the air cool, and her heart peaceful, not because everything was perfect, but because she had finally made peace with her past. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her younger brother. "Saw the news, sis. Proud of you. Dad cried today, in a good way. He said she fixed what I couldn't." She sat down on a bench under a streetlight, tears falling freely, not from pain, but from healing. She remembered how broken her family had been, how quiet her voice once was, and now, here she was, not just speaking, but being heard in the weeks that followed. Amara was invited to speak at schools, not as a hero, but as a reminder. She told young girls and boys, "You don't need money to be powerful. You don't need a loud voice to be strong. You only need to stand when it matters." The cafe became a symbol of truth and fairness. People from other cities visited just to meet her. And yet, Amara stayed humble, always serving with the same gentle smile. Months later, Mr. Bradley was sentenced to prison. He had tried everything: money, threats, lawyers, but truth had finally won. And the world moved on, but they never forgot how it happened. It wasn't a lawyer or a politician. It wasn't a celebrity or an activist. It was a waitress, a daughter, a voice that said, "Enough," and because of her, others started speaking too, across cities. More people stood up to injustice. More women said no to abuse. More workers demanded respect. One spark had started a fire of change. And as for Amara, she didn't want statues or titles. She only wanted one thing: to be the person her mother always believed she could be. As she wiped a table and locked the cafe one evening, she looked up at the sign above the door. It still read the same cafe name, but someone had added a small line beneath it, "Where voices are served." She smiled, turned off the lights, and walked home, not as a victim, not even as a hero, but as a woman who chose truth over fear, and in doing so, became the voice that changed everything.